Hannibal is considered by many to be the greatest general that ever lived. His fame goes beyond the borders of Africa. Because of his place in history, people oftentimes question his origin. Despite the back and forth concerning the matter, Afro-descendant men in particular seem to be caught in the crosshairs. Either our agency in Carthaginian civilization is completely denied, or it's dragged down to an acceptable size. The confirmed Africanness of Hannibal, in a sense, would redeem all Afro-centered efforts to seemingly place ourselves in respectable narratives. But we have to go where the evidence leads us. And today, for Black men in diaspora, we'll attempt to discover where that leads. What up, African world? It's Home Team here, and I'm back at it with another video of African history, culture, and worldview. And today, we're going to talk about Hannibal. And as always, if you want access to full courses, exclusive videos, or if you simply want to support the Home Team, you can do so on patreon.com. Also, go to Afrographics.com, a website where you can find unique illustrative infographics summarizing African history. All the basic information you need is neatly compiled for you there, including sources for all articles posted. It's a really good resource and introduction to African history for beginners. The link to Patreon and Afrographics is in the description box below. Carthage was founded by the Phoenicians in or around 814 BC. It eventually gained independence around 650 BC and began to spread its influence throughout North Africa. Ancient Carthage was a diverse population of people, largely from Africa, but also from parts of the Mediterranean world. At the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that the Phoenicians were a mixed population and can be viewed as more of a culture than a homogeneous group of people. The Phoenicians were constantly on the move for whatever reason, and they tended to influence and even blend into the societies in which they decided to lay their heads. Before we get into the identity of Hannibal, let's first discuss the rise of the Barca family. In 238 BC, a Carthaginian general named Hannibal Barca led an expedition into Spain. This expedition was unauthorized by the Carthaginian government, but Hannibal Barca, the father of Hannibal, was very ambitious and was in pursuit of power and glory. If we're to truly understand the greatness of Hannibal in its proper context, we must first understand his father. In essence, Hannibal was merely a continuation of the Barca legacy. The Barca family's control of Spain ensured their power in Carthage. After Hannibal conquered parts of Spain, he was able to amass great wealth from plunder, filling his public treasury. This wealth bought him a proper army and helped him to purchase majority support from the Carthaginian Senate. Ironically, the gold he acquired from the Spanish mines were enough to buy off the Carthaginian political process. This gave the Barca family total control over Carthage, and they ruled with impunity. Hamilcar was in charge of all the forces on land and at sea. He wanted to make Carthage ready because he knew that Rome had its own ambition and could not be trusted. Hamilcar fought in the latter end of the First Punic War and absolutely despised Rome. Apparently, his hatred for Rome was passed down to his son, Hannibal. In fact, legend has it that Hannibal promised his father that he would always consider Rome his chief enemy. Hannibal took control of the Carthaginian forces at the age of 25. Tensions with Rome grew, and Hannibal began to put together a large army. By 228 BC, a Roman frontier began to expand into Spain, and Hannibal began to campaign there in order to ensure Carthaginian control. Hannibal took city after city as he drove through. The wealth he acquired purchased him supplies and troops to continue his trek, and this is where the legend of Hannibal reached its zenith. Hannibal marched from Spain, crossing into southern France, and eventually reached Italy. His military victories and tactics were second to none. Roman general after Roman general were consistently outmaneuvered by Hannibal. They even sought to avoid direct battle with Hannibal at one point. Not only did Hannibal win the respect of his enemy, but he won the respect of his troops by living the same hard life they did, eating the same foods, and even sleeping on the ground. His triumphant feats in battle against arguably the greatest military force on the planet made him the greatest military strategist in human history, according to some scholars. With such a great man in human history, people are bound to inquire about what he looked like or simply where his people came from. They largely inquire because, one, there aren't any consistent portrayals of him, and also because he came from the continent of Africa. They're fascinated with the idea that a man of his stature could come from Africa, and therefore possibly be of the same origin of all Afro-descended people. The portrayals of Hannibal are definitely confusing. Either position you take on the ethnic or racial origin of Hannibal seems to have its problems. Popular culture itself seems to be confused, as multiple Hannibals have been presented from various racial backgrounds. They seem to have this battle between historical honesty and maintaining the status quo. One of the primary reasons for this confusion is because the Romans themselves, after taking Carthage, probably destroyed most evidence of Hannibal's presence. To resolve this issue, the only thing we can really do is review what we already know, but from a different angle. The Western world will consistently present to you about 3 images that they believe are portraits of Hannibal. Unfortunately, they present these images without much context. All 3 of these images have a sort of Mediterranean look. The best chance of actually having a general idea of Hannibal's physical features are from coins. There currently exist about 8 coins that may be associated with Hannibal himself or the nation-state of Carthage. Oddly enough, out of the 8 coins proposed to be from the time of Hannibal, 5 of them are not recognized by mainstream archaeologists, and these 5 coins just so happen to possess typical African features. Regardless, we have to look at the evidence as much as we can and see why these coins may or may not be Hannibal. Before we get into the coins, let's speak about a very popular proposed bust of Hannibal that you'll inevitably see upon the slightest research. This bust was found in Capua, Italy, and is promoted as being Hannibal. The primary issue is not that this isn't an image of Hannibal, but the issue is that they completely ignore ancient historical perspectives to paint a picture to the viewer. Francis Polsky, a noted iconographer, flat out says that this is not a sculpture of Hannibal at all, but simply the ideal representation of a hero. This bust in all likelihood is simply a sculpture depicting an ideal hero and not Hannibal himself. Another proposed image of Hannibal is this coin here. Now, nobody actually claims this is Hannibal, but it's often found across the web as a depiction of Hannibal's father and ultimately a representation of the Barca family. But it's simply a depiction of a Punic god, Melkart. Or you'll see this proposed image of Hannibal floating across popular culture. This image is also a depiction of the Punic god Melkart and not Hannibal, but unfortunately popular culture takes the disingenuous position that the depiction of the Punic god was minted in association with the features of Hannibal, and there are others with similar depictions. Now, the official position of one of the primary researchers on this topic is from Colonel Hannibal, and he says, there exists no really authentic portrait of Hannibal. Now, we can't mistake that to mean that no authentic portraits of him actually exist. The best way to interpret that is that we cannot confirm with certainty any authentic images of Hannibal, because arguments can be made even about the coins with Punic gods on them. It still can be possible that those are images of Hannibal. However, the other coins that are ignored are done so with little to no reason other than the fact that they depict typical Africans. Before I get into this coin, it's important to understand that I'm not making the argument that this is Hannibal. I'm making the argument that there is no reason why this coin should be ignored as it is in popular and scholarly spaces. The discovery of this coin and others like it are very inconvenient. Why? Well, because it was found in Italy dated around 217 BC in the vicinity of Lake Trasimeno. Hannibal defeated the Romans at the Battle of Trasimeno. Some make the claim that Hannibal never minted coins in Italy, but that simply isn't true. According to scholars Carey and Scullard, at Capua, Hannibal issued an electrum coinage, and probably some silver coins also with elephants. Now, some others claim that even though he minted coins in Italy, the featured African on the coin is merely an elephant driver and not Hannibal himself. Aside from that simply not making sense, the Carthaginians wouldn't put in the effort of minting a coin that did not either represent a god or an elite figure. We have to ask ourselves, why would a general who put in all that work immortalize one elephant driver? That's simply unrealistic. But the biggest and the only reasonable opposing view that this coin is not an image of Hannibal is the argument that the elephant on the other side is an Indian elephant and not an African. Even though most of Hannibal's elephants were African, Carthaginians did obtain Indian elephants from Egypt. All of Hannibal's elephants died except one before the Battle of Trasimeno. They suffered so severely, however, from the rain and the snow that followed, that all the elephants perished except one, and many men and horses also died of the cold. The only one that survived was a smaller Indian elephant. It's reported that Hannibal adored this elephant and even gave him a name, Surus. Surus was Hannibal's favorite elephant. Gavin de Beer says, "He, Hannibal, rode the sole remaining elephant, an animal which may have found its way into history, for some years later, Cato the Elder recorded that the elephant which fought most bravely in the Second Punic War was called Surus. This name means the Syrian, and Syria was where the Ptolemies had captured Indian elephants, some of which they must have given to Carthage. A bronze coin found in the valley of the Clanis, on Hannibal's route to Lake Trasimene, bears on the obverse a Negro's head indicating an African connection, and on the reverse an equally obvious Indian elephant. It is believed to have been minted at just about this time, 217 BC, and as Pyrrhus never came this way with his elephants, the coin probably bears a representation of Hannibal's sole surviving elephant, the Indian Surus. As it pertains to the last Indian elephant depicted on this coin and the individual on the other side, it would seem obvious who it was depicting. Hannibal himself on the sole remaining elephant got across with much difficulty and suffering, being in great pain from a severe attack of ophthalmia, which finally led to the loss of one eye, as he had no time to stop and apply any treatment to it, the circumstances rendering that impossible. As a whole, we can't know for certain if this coin is the actual image of Hannibal, but popular culture and the scholarly world have absolutely no reason to ignore its possible legitimacy in favor of others. As it pertains to black men in the African diaspora, we definitely should admire and identify with the bravery, skill, and determination of Hannibal. His legacy symbolized the strength of the African continent and its capabilities. As Hannibal took from the strength of his father, so too should black men in the diaspora take from the strength of Hannibal, continuing this African legacy. We should be selfish and unapologetic about who we claim to be our heroes. We can be reminded of our dark ages and use that energy to catapult us into our future. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you like these videos and want to learn more, you can support the home team on patreon.com. Also, go to Afrographics.com. Links to Patreon and Afrographics are in the description box below. Know thyself, remember your ancestors. Peace.